Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. To welcome you once again on this beautiful night of Ramadan. It is the 24th night of Ramadan. The time is just gone 9:34 p.m. as we welcome our listeners, our viewers to the show this morning. Once again, a special broadcast brought to you on this night of Ramadan. And when we look around the world, a lot is happening, particularly out in Palestine. We know that there are many people that have gone to Palestine to spend the last 10 nights of Ramadan in Masjid al-Aqsa. But coming to South Africa, we are honored to have Dr. Yuri Davis, who is a leading member of the Palestinian National Liberation Movement, the PLMO, and currently the Deputy Commissioner General for Political Affairs of the Palestine Liberation Movement, and also FATCH International Relations Commission. Now, he is in South Africa. He's arrived in South Africa today, also accompanied by Mrs. Kifah Harb, who is a member of the Fatah Revolutionary Council, and she obviously has been seeking justice for the marginalized for a very, very long time. Now, both Dr. Davis and Mrs. Kifah have been in the past in Africa, and also looking at July last year, looking at the AU Council of Foreign Ministers who actually met, and also looking at the AU and its position on Palestine. And we're honored to have both of them in South Africa. As I mentioned, they've arrived just today. So at short notice, we are honored to have them, and we appreciate both Dr. Davis and Mrs. Kifah taking time out and talking to us this evening here on Salam Media. Firstly, we're going across Dr. Yuri Davis. Welcome to the show.
I much appreciate the fact that you were able to bring me on this show at short notice. Thank you very much, sir.
Yes, wonderful that you're able to join us, and we do appreciate the fact that at short notice you are available for this interview on Salam Media. We welcome you to Salam Media. We welcome our listeners, our viewers as well, and hopefully we will be also joined by Mrs. Kifah Harb very shortly as well. I'm not too sure whether she is connected, but my engineer will let me know. But Dr. Davis, at short notice, coming to South Africa, we welcome you to the country, and we know you've been all around Africa. And just to begin with, looking at your visit in South Africa, just briefly, the purpose of your visit in coming to South Africa. Yes, Dr. Davis, I have noticed that the mic has been muted. If you could just please unmute the mic. There we go. Okay, brilliant.
There was an interruption of about a minute. I missed your narrative, sir, for about 45 seconds.
Yes, well, as I said, welcome to South Africa, and at short notice, we thank you for coming on to Salam Media, for talking to us this evening, and just briefly an overview and the purpose of your visit to South Africa before we get down talking to about a number of other issues, because we know a lot is happening in Palestine at this point in time.
Well,
I've seen that the mic has been muted once again. It does appear as if there are some technical issues. If the mic could be unmuted, please. We are having a problem with the mic.
Yet another interruption, cyberspace interruption. Cyberspace allows us the privilege of actually communicating on an audio-visual basis, and that is wonderful, but cyberspace can also be quite difficult sometimes. The purpose of our visit as a team of Fatah International Relations Commission, is related to the fact that the President of the African Union, acting within its constitutional rights, took a very negative decision. There's no question that he has the right to take decisions in this area, but the decision also ought to be justifiable and positive rather than wholly mistaken and misguided. He accepted the papers submitted to him by the ambassador of a state called Israel, which is the last apartheid state member in the United Nations Organization, for affiliation of Israel to the African Union in an observer capacity. Now, that decision, of course, caused immediate dispute within the African Union, and the dispute and the discussion that ensued that decision was then, the decision was taken not to decide at the level of the summit, but to submit the decision to the council or to the executive council of the union, and the same procedure took place there. It was debated very heatedly, but not voted for, no decision taken, and again transferred to a committee of 7 to be chaired by the state of Senegal. And that debate is about to take place. And here we are as a team, Mrs. Kifah and myself, basically attempting to intervene within our mandate in the following sections. Look here, sir, I am a part, it is correct that I am a part, together with Mrs. Kifah, of Fatah leadership. But relative to the weight of the negative weight, the criminal weight of the United States of America and the apartheid state of Israel, supported regrettably by the European Union, I compare our weight to basically the weight of a grain of sand or a grain of wheat. But the debate is like, it seems to be like a scales, where the plates are wavering up and down between the voice of arguing within any given state against the affiliation and the voice arguing in any given state for the affiliation. And the scales waver up and down without decision. In my experience, sir, if you have a grain based on justice and you put your grain on the plate of justice, if you have a grain based on commitment to human rights and put your grain on the scale of justice, sometimes your little grain actually settles the balance in favor of justice. And we are meeting leadership of the ruling parties and respective ruling parties. We are meeting leadership of trade unions, of churches, arguing to the best of our ability to convince them to vote against the affiliation of the only remaining apartheid states in the United States, in the United Nations General Assembly, voting against its affiliation as observer state. And if you would allow me another minute, I would want to submit to you a thought as to why should it be so important for this apartheid state to affiliate itself as an observer state in a continent that is well outside its geographical location. And I have an explanation which I would like to share with yourself and our audience. A movement in the year 2005 was launched, known by its initial BDS, Boycott, Divestment and Sanctions Against Apartheid Israel, similar to the anti-apartheid international movement that was so important in actually helping with the collapse of apartheid in South Africa. That movement over the past 2 decades, since 2005, has been going from strength to strength in Europe and North America. Israeli legitimacy, false legitimacy, misleading, misrepresented legitimacy as the only democracy in the Middle East is wearing very thin in Europe and North America. You will be hard put to find a student or a lecturer in any given university in Europe and America trying to defend Israeli apartheid policies. What Israel is trying to do is compensate for the loss of its legitimacy in Europe and North America by gaining legitimacy in the continent of Africa. 55 states in the African Union, as about a third of the membership of the General Assembly. That would be regarded by the apartheid government as a significant achievement in propping out its failing legitimacy, and that prop should not be allowed.
Well, I think you make a very, very important point, and this was going to be a leading question in terms of Israel and how does Israel see Africa, the African nations, and looking at it as fertile ground to gain the legitimacy that you speak of, Dr. Davis.
This has been happening for some time now, and regrettably, sir, supported by the evangelical churches around the globe. The evangelical churches, how should I put it? Let me take one step backwards. The politicization of religion has always caused suffering worldwide. The politicization of Islam has caused suffering worldwide. The politicization of Judaism, known as Zionism, has been causing endless suffering to the Palestinian people, occupation and continuing expansion of settler colonialism. And the politicization of Christianity is likewise a phenomenon of great negative consequences. And over the past a decade or 2 decades, there has been an incursion of political Christianity into Africa with some influence. And again, we are trying, myself as a person of Jewish origin and anti-Zionist conviction, and Mrs. Kifah as a Fatah colleague and a refugee herself, ethnically cleansed from her family inside Israel. As a team, we are trying to meet and throw our weight and our conviction in the church arena to reject the Zionist interpretation of Christianity in Africa and beyond.
Yes. Now, I know you've put in a lot of hard work and looking at your position and also looking at international relations, which is absolutely critical in reaching out to countries where I know in the past you've reached out to the AU, you've reached out to a number of countries like Ethiopia, Nigeria, Senegal, Gambia as well. And just looking at the message that you are conveying to these African countries, and also looking at South Africa now that you are here, and as you mentioned, that you will be reaching out to a cross-section of South African society, civil society, religious organizations, and I'm sure even people, even political affiliations in this country, Dr. Davis.
That is correct. And I'm 79 years old this year, and I've been at the forefront of the political struggle against Zionism for the better part of the half a century. And I attest on the basis of experience that if you take your point of departure as justice and human rights, and you persevere in your advocacy, your message eventually gets through. Look at Martin Luther King, look at Nelson Mandela, look at Mahatma Gandhi. I don't compare myself to these giant icons of human rights, but they are definitely represent an example of hope. If you persevere in your pursuit of justice, you get your message through.
Well, certainly. And also just in your engagement and in your interaction, particularly with Africa, and you spoke about the 55 AU member states as well, and looking at how your message is being received in Africa, and in terms of, whether they truly appreciate the Palestinian struggle, and also at the same time realize the danger that Israel poses, even as an observer at the AU level?
Can you focus the question a little bit further?
Yes. What I'm saying is, do the African nations, the 55 member states, truly appreciate the danger that Israel actually poses, being even in an observer status at the AU?
The knowledge is there, the appreciation is there, but the political arena is divided. The political arena is divided by leadership that takes its point of departure the question of rights and international law and principle, such as Namibia, South Africa, Algeria, and more, and the countries that take their point of departure from by other standards, like, for instance, losing certain projects that are supported by Israel, losing economic assistance and sometimes military assistance by apartheid Israel, and trying to balance between the two considerations. These two considerations, in my experience, are always there. There hasn't been a government that is completely ignorant of the ethics and the morality of the case, nor is there a government that is completely ignorant of its interests, economic and other interests, as a sovereign state. And they're trying to establish a balance. And again, I repeat, our role, my role, and the role of my colleague, Mrs. Kifah, is to add our grain of influence in order that the balance tips in favor of justice.
Yes. Now, if we just take a step back also, and when one looks at the Trump era during the Trump presidency, and also with his son-in-law Jared Kushner, and the move to normalize relations, and we know that gained a lot of momentum at that point in time, to the extent where, to much disappointment, countries like the UAE, countries like Bahrain, Morocco, Sudan had already started normalizing. So it's basically started where acceptance of Israel is being forced down, or it's being pushed through for some reason or the other. And I just need your thoughts on the normalization that already has taken place, and what this actually means. And could African countries be influenced by what they see happening, or what has happened with the likes of the UAE, Bahrain, Morocco, and the like?
Well, of course, these negative instances would influence at least some governments in Africa and some states in Africa. But the normalization, how should I put it, ought to be considered in context. For instance, in the heydays of apartheid in South Africa, there were states in Africa that maintained normal relationship with the apartheid South African government. There were states beyond Africa that had maintained normal relationship with apartheid South Africa. Yet these normal relationships proved to be short-sighted and short-term, both in the case of South Africa and will be short-sighted and short-term in the case of Israel. In the case of South Africa, as we were all aware, apartheid collapsed in South Africa because apartheid is not a viable projection. Apartheid has no future and is destined to collapse. And it's the short-sightedness and selfishness of the states that apartheid with Israel normalized with apartheid with Israel, just as it was the short-sightedness of African and other states that continued normalization with apartheid South Africa. Apartheid has no future. That is the lesson that the presidents of South Africa imparts to Africa and the world. And but in this context, I actually want to say something, because normalization is not exactly the same in the case of each Arab states. I would draw your attention to the fact that the normalization, for instance, of Bahrain with apartheid Israel is actually absolutely inexplicable and objectionable, and is probably based on interests that verge or touch with the question of outright bribery. But look at states like Egypt or Jordan. Egypt or Jordan have a common border with the state of Israel. And now we take a step back and take a document out of my pocket. This is my British passport. This is my Israel passport. I travel on both British passport and Israel passport. If I here on your show, sir, submitted that I don't recognize the state of Israel while its Israel passport is in my pocket and I travel on the basis of that passport, I would make an utter idiot of myself. The proper narrative is that I don't recognize Israel as an apartheid state, that I don't recognize apartheid in Israel. I have no problem in recognizing the state of Israel as a member state in the United Nations, subject to all UN resolutions, the implementation of all UN resolutions, the implementation of the standards of international law and the values of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I have problem with the apartheid regime of the state of Israel. And we have to be sensitive to these differences and place them in context. And my argument for instance, vis-a-vis the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan or the government of Egypt is not, why did you recognize the state of Israel? You have a common state with the state of Israel. You have to recognize the state of Israel. But why don't you lend your weight and influence and international contacts and so forth to support boycott of apartheid Israel? In order to boycott of apartheid Israel, of course we have to recognize Israel. Boycott, divest and sanctions apartheid Israel. Throw your weight in the United Nations Organization General Assembly to apply on the state of Israel the 1973 binding international covenant of the suppression and punishment of the crime of apartheid. And if you do that, you will possibly see the collapse of Israeli apartheid within my lifetime. I'm 79 years old today.
Yes. Now, Dr. Davis, I know the message that you've been sending has been a very, very strong message, and obviously over and over again, you've been citing human rights violations. When you're talking about apartheid Israel, we're talking about the blockade of Gaza. We know what has been taking place in West Bank, and as we speak, these violations are still continuing. It is the month of Ramadan. We know what has happened in Al-Aqsa recently as well. And just looking at the message and the people that you are going to be reaching out to, the organizations, the governments of the civil society, and when we're talking about solidarity for the cause of the people of Palestine, in what form would that solidarity be? What are you going to be proposing?
It is a bit presumptions to ask me in what form that solidarity should be. But I'll put my neck on the chopping block and tell you my opinion in this regard, or with a measure of humiliation that it deserves. For instance, some Muslim states, do not encourage pilgrimage to Jerusalem, Muslim pilgrimage to Jerusalem, so long as the Israeli occupation is in force. In my opinion, the correct reverse decision is required. I encourage mass Muslim pilgrimage to Jerusalem because the mass of the people in an Al-Aqsa Mosque is the best defense of an Al-Aqsa Mosque. And the mass congregation of Muslim pilgrimage from Muslim countries, not just from Arab countries, is a barrier preventing the further incursion of the Israeli occupation into the Haram al-Sharif. So this is one comment I would make in this connection.
Well, certainly, because we know that there have been many South Africans this year who have actually gone to the Haram Sharif, and as recently as a few days ago, we know that there have been quite a few delegations that have gone and that are in Al-Aqsa at this point in time, and we know the Palestinians have been encouraging people to come to the Haram Sharif over and over again. But once again, you know, when we look at this month of Ramadan, and it does appear as if every Ramadan without fail, there seems to be some problem. The security apparatus goes in. We know what has happened. We've seen the damage that was done last week. We've seen the arrests that were taken that had taken place, and even to the extent that the media, and perhaps just your thoughts on the media and journalists who are covering the injustices, and just your thoughts on the media and how the media is reporting on what is taking place in Palestine versus what we see in the mainstream, Dr. Davis. And when I talk of mainstream, we're talking of global media, we're talking of the media giants, we're looking at the likes of the BBC, we're looking at the likes of CNN and the world media.
Well, regrettably, racism is still rife in the West. Racism is still rife in North America. Racism is still rife in Europe. And the fundamental racism of the West reflects in the reporting of the mass media. If you take just a simple example of the humanitarian plight of the people of the Ukraine and the humanitarian plight of the people of Palestine, it's quite, there is a saying in Arabic, "Sharrul baliyati ma yudhik." The way that Palestine refugees are being treated in the mainstream media and the main Ukrainian refugees are being treated, but not just by the media, but by the government, is really pathetic and saddening. And that's all that one, the hypocrisy is so transparent that will ultimately bounce back and hopefully correct, at least to some extent, the reporting that is until now so deficient.
Well, Dr. Davis, I must say it's been an absolute pleasure, and I know it has been at short notice. You must be very tired, a long trip to South Africa. You just landed this afternoon, and you took time out to talk to us here at Salam Media this evening. And we definitely will be following your trip to South Africa, and I'm sure a lot will be reported on social media and also many other platforms. So we definitely will be following developments, and hopefully at some point in time, I know Mrs. Kifah Harb was unable to join us. We will get an opportunity to talk to her at some point in time. But for now, we wish you all the best. We wish you well in the country. Enjoy South Africa. But more importantly, the purpose and the reason why you are here, we trust and hope, and we pray for you. We pray that you achieve your objectives. And we wish you all the best. We wish you health. We wish you safety.
Thank you very much, sir. Your support is really appreciated and taken to heart.
Dr. Yuri Davis joining us this evening, and he just basically landed in South Africa. Unfortunately, we were unable to speak with Madam Kifah Harb, but inshallah, we certainly will try and get hold of her. And Dr. Davis will be in South Africa and talking to a cross-section of society, to government, to civil society, to trade unions, and more importantly, to articulate the Palestinian cause, to look at the African Union. Once again, that has been a big issue. It's been a major issue where Israel was granted observer status at the AU. And this is one of the reasons why Dr. Yuri Davis is here. And hopefully we will bring you a lot more interviews and a lot more information as it comes through. And also we will follow some of the developments. And as far as Dr. Yuri Davis and Mrs. Kifah Harb and who they will be meeting. So we will be providing you with a regular update from time to time. But for now, I'm going to be signing off once again. It's been an absolute pleasure being in your company. It's a few days of Ramadan that are left. Yes, tonight being the 24th night of Ramadan. We've got a few days left for the month of Ramadan. Inshallah, we continue. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes it easy. Allah continue shower His mercy on us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us all forgiveness, and we make dua for ourselves, our loved ones, our families. We make dua for the ummah of Nabi sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and particularly those who are oppressed. We make dua that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala ease their plight, and Allah ta'ala make it easy on each and everyone. And with that, I'm going to be signing off from myself and the team. Once again, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.